Does thinking deeply about life make people unhappy? Some critics have suggested that philosophy can lead to anxiety, doubt, and even despair, and that ignorance might be a kind of bliss. In the following module, we'll examine whether philosophy might constitute a kind of psychological harm. Okay, so number 2, this one also I can appreciate and resonates to a degree. There's this argument that philosophy might make us unhappy, or as I put it here somewhere, that it might be depressing, a depressing sort of process. Yikes. So the way I like to kind of frame this complaint, if you will, or this suggestion is, we've all heard of this notion, ignorance is bliss, yeah? Yeah, okay. Well, if you think about it, is that really true? Maybe it is. And as we progress throughout the semester, we will see, through various philosophers' arguments, the implication on the part of some of them that they do think there's some truth to this, right? We'll see Nietzsche at the very end of the semester kind of implying as much, okay? In which case, if this is true, ignorance is bliss, what's the implication? It seems to suggest that these are divergent paths, right? If you're going to go and seek one, then you're not going to be able to go and get the other one. Okay? Someone who says this or thinks this is basically implying this. Right? Now, maybe they're wrong. Okay? Maybe it's the case that the only real path to happiness is maybe finding the truth. Maybe these are actually the same path. But the notion that ignorance is bliss seems to suggest this, that they're divergent. Right? If you want bliss, i.e. happiness, then you better, right, not have this, but the opposite, right? Because ignorance is the lack of this, right? Everybody knows what ignorance means, okay? So philosophy, in some sense, is trying to remove this, right? We want the truth, the opposite of ignorance. Well, if ignorance is required for bliss, and philosophy is trying to remove that, do you guys see what's the suggestion then? Right? The more philosophical we get, we might remove or eliminate some of this and get further down the path of truth, but it seems the suggestion is we'll be more removed from this then. Okay? So the believers in this sort of mantra, right, they would suggest, okay, I guess you're going to need to pick, right? Do you want, what's more important to you? And Nietzsche, by the way, again, is one who seems to suggest this is true, and he says this path is the more important one. He chooses that path. But yeah, so people that are buying into this are basically going to suggest if you want happiness, your best bet is to drop this, don't do this please, drop this course, right, and go back to autopilot. Stop thinking, stop analyzing, just act on your natural programmed instincts, or however you want to put it, autopilot, right? Stop thinking critically, stop being philosophical and analyzing things, right? And that's your best bet to actually experience happiness or bliss. Everybody kind of get that kind of idea, whether you agree with it or not. And that is something that, maybe we will discover or sort of form an opinion on as we progress throughout the semester. And we will kind of revisit that. Like I said, there'll be various readings and so on. Some of these thinkers will kind of make references to this, and so we'll revisit this. But the general idea is maybe philosophy leads to, right, misery or a lack of this. And that kind of would make sense if this is really the case. Okay, now, I'm not saying this is the case. Okay, but if that is the case, then that might present a huge problem for philosophy. Maybe not, though. Even if this is the case, maybe this is still the right way to go. And so you shouldn't be dropping, even if this is true. Right? Because maybe truth should win out over happiness. Anyway, does everybody kind of appreciate that? Okay. So I think I mentioned that. And we do have, the very bottom there of the slide, examples throughout the history of philosophy of various thinkers kind of having nervous breakdowns. And Nietzsche is the most, I think, obvious example. He spends the last 10 years of his life in asylums or under the care of his mother and sister. So in other words, 1890 through he died in 1900. All 10 of those years, the last years of his life, he was basically in an asylum, like I said. So John Stuart Mill also has a breakdown in his early 20s, which it's really interesting. He reflects back on that nervous breakdown in his autobiography. And I think we will reference that later in the course when we introduce John Stuart Mill in more depth. But he's another example of a really pretty well-known philosopher who, had a breakdown for some time anyway. Kierkegaard, William James, all these guys are pretty well-known thinkers who struggled, at least at times, right?
with bouts of depression or unhappiness, however you want to put it.
To better understand and appreciate the value of philosophy, we'll now turn our attention to one of the more influential discussions of it in contemporary philosophy, specifically what Bertrand Russell has to say about the value of philosophy in his book, The Problems of Philosophy.